Is America finally getting with the program and ramping up its production of combat UAVs? Just why now? And why is there such an urgency for the Pentagon to equip its forces with these drones when there's no war going on? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Now, again, on this channel, I'm obviously critical of everybody, but that doesn't mean that I'm just like a hater who's just mad at the world. When anyone does good governance, I'm here to high five them for it because, you know, on this channel, believe it or not, we actually want America to win. And I think this is an example of actually America winning. So we're going to take a look. This is actually dropped from the Secretary of Defense and has been pretty widely circulated, in which he unveils a program for what he calls America's drone dominance. Let's take a listen, and I'm going to provide some commentary on his talking points. Let's go.
We know why we were put here. We were brought here to rebuild the military, match capabilities to the threats of today. So while our adversaries have produced millions of cheap drones, before us, we were mired in bureaucratic red tape.
So this is actually a great point. And what he talks about here is meeting the challenges of today. And the reason I think that is such an important concept in this in sort of defense thinking is here's the analogy that you should use, is that imagine you show up at a hospital. You've been in a car accident and you're bleeding profusely from your arm. Maybe you also have diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer, right? But none of that matters, because if you bleed out from your arm, you don't even have the opportunity to address your other health issues, no matter how serious they might be. And that is the way military procurement has to work, is that the long-term procurement strategy, things like developing advanced next-generation fighters, space-based weapon systems, or advanced AI tools to see the battlefield, super drone swarms, all of those gee-whiz high-tech items are 5 to 10 years away. The problem is that if your military is defeated today, it doesn't matter that you could have a super weapon that would win the war 5 years down the line. It's similar to, again, the Germans in World War II, who were famous towards the end of the war for investing in these super weapons that, again, if they were able to somehow leap 5 years into the future, might be decisive war-winning weapons. But because they didn't focus on their collapsing fronts at that moment, it didn't matter. That is the strategic miscalculation that militaries oftentimes can run into. And I think this is something that the Pentagon finds itself in, because there was a sense that drones would be a presence on the battlefield, but it was generally believed that the drones would replace combat aircraft, and that they would perform functions similar to just unmanned versions of reconnaissance and strike aircraft. But the truth is that they aren't a substitute for aircraft. They're a substitute for infantry. And that's one of the things that we've seen in the deployments of drones in really the Ukrainian war, is that drones fulfill functions that would otherwise be performed by infantry. These are a substitute for an anti-tank team. They're a substitute for a mortar team. They're a substitute for a reconnaissance team, a reconnaissance platoon. And that is the fundamental miscalculation I think that the Pentagon has realized that it's made. And so it's saying, damn, we aren't ready to fight today. Again, I don't have a full list of every piece of equipment that a modern American combat brigade brings to the fight, but I have said on this channel, and I've told my friends repeatedly, that if today's American heavy brigade combat team was to get suddenly dropped into Toretsk, they would not survive as a combat effective unit without tremendous assistance from the Ukrainians. And the reason is because that is the American Heavy Brigade Combat Team has no tools to counter fiber optic drones. They have none of the ability for their armor to survive in an environment with fiber optic drones. They have very limited ability to conceal themselves from thermal threats. They have conducted limited to almost no training in sort of entrenching procedures. The whole intercoordination with drone forces is really complicated, as we've seen. right? Where you have sort of drones as sort of the first wave of assaults. You have drones performing logistics tasks that would otherwise be performed by combat vehicles that are huge targets. There's numerous issues with today's heavy brigade combat team. And you could apply the same thing to an infantry brigade combat team, or take your pick. So this whole concept of rapidly getting the American military able to fight and win against the armies of the world today, not the armies of the world 5 years from now, not the battlefields of 10 years into the future, but fight and win today is exactly what he's talking about. And that is an important distinction that I think, again, is really, really worth acknowledging. Okay, let's listen to some more.
Not anymore. In June, President Trump issued an executive order unleashing American drone dominance to bolster our drone industry and arm our warfighters, because that's what we're all about. So today, I'm rescinding restrictive policies that stifle production, and this will unleash American manufacturing and the ingenuity of our warfighters by doing three key things. First, we're going to bolster the U.S. drone manufacturing base by producing thousands of American-made products, prioritizing Buy American. We'll arm combat units with a variety of low-cost American-crafted drones, leveraging our world-leading engineers and AI experts.
Now, this is, again, the right way to be thinking about this. That you have to be able to design the weapon systems that are going to survive the battlefields of the future and the battlefield of today, and you have to manufacture them, right? Because as we've seen with Ukraine and Russia, the other problem is that there's not just these small, low-cost combat drones. There's also low-cost strategic drones, right? The ability of the United States to manufacture its combat drones is pretty essential. Imagine if we said, okay, great, we have our units equipped with hundreds of combat drones, but then after 6 weeks of war, the units go, great, we've expended our combat drones, put in an order for more, and the U.S. has to go to China and say, hey, can you guys make us more of your drones? China's going to go, no, you're the Americans. You're our geopolitical rivals. You're our adversaries. Why on earth would we equip you? And so the fear is that even if you were to do it with an ally, let's say Vietnam, right, or or India, or another country that can do sort of medium tech manufacturing, the issue is they could be subject to coercion. Again, China might make them an offer they can't refuse, right? Either too many carrots or too many sticks. So the only way to be sure that your country is going to be able to produce what is necessary is to make it in-house. And you'll never be able to make all of it in-house, but the idea is to combine what is called basically autarky, make key components inside your country, but then also make sure that the components of the components get manufactured, what sometimes is called friend shoring. This is the idea that you don't necessarily offshore your manufacturing to an adversary. You make sure it goes to someone who you have close, strong ties to, right? So again, where would you rather have drone components manufactured or drone subcomponents manufactured? The People's Republic of China or Mexico, right? Obviously, you'd want Mexico. We have a strong relationship with them. This, as you see, this is also sort of one of the problems with kind of the president's, like, every issue is its own issue. Because if you piss off the Mexicans and then you turn around and say, hey, we actually want you guys as our friends to like manufacture more of our small electronics and the cameras that'll go into these FPV drones, the Mexican government may be like, go pound sand, buddy. So this is sort of a complicating factor, but this is the right way to think about national security in a logistic sense, right? Especially if you've gone from a counterinsurgent war, right? Where at the end of the day, the Iraqi insurgents didn't really have many international friends. The Afghanistan Taliban didn't really have a lot of like international support. Certainly countries were not going to boycott the United States to side with the Taliban, right? That was never really going to happen. But could that happen in a war with China? Absolutely. Countries could say, listen, we do a lot more trade with China than we do with you, United States. So now the U.S. has to go from thinking about things as being protecting soldiers and developing the country like the counterinsurgency math. They have to sit there and go, well, listen, we need to be prepared to fight and win a war of attrition in which we will expend 2, 3, 4 million drones. By the way, that's what Ukraine expects to expend in a typical year. So this whole mentality of being war as an economic industry, as an economic problem that just so happens to involve uniformed service members fighting is the way to think about this more modern warfare. So again, I think this is great. I think the trap that you could fall into is bringing these U.S. manufacturing experts, these U.S. AI experts, U.S. engineers, as long as they get the right set of guidelines. Because what happens so often with military tech is generals at the Pentagon, they want one more thing. Everybody wants to add their little piece to the pie. And so you'll sit there and they'll go, listen, we want simple. We want a drone with a camera, 4 rotors, and the ability to attach a warhead that we can fly into a tank, into an enemy formation. That's what we want. And then some general goes, yeah, but I want to be able to use it for reconnaissance. So why don't you give it a bigger, better camera? Then somebody else goes, yeah, but I actually want to be able to just do a modular switch out of the batteries. Right? And somebody else goes, well, I want to be able to use it as a relay for communications. Next thing you know, the drone cost $170,000. It has antennas and super cameras, and the warhead steadily shrunk over time. So now it carries something more powerful than a grenade. And the result is a diminished warfighting effort where it would have been cheaper to simply say, listen, we're going to make 5 drone variants and literally each one is $500. Instead, you get a Swiss Army knife that does all of them terribly, right? Because at the end of the day, look, everybody owns a Swiss Army knife. Have you ever opened a bottle of wine with a Swiss Army knife? No, you use a specialty corkscrew. It's easier. It's possible. So that's the idea with these cheap, low-cost drones, is that you have to niche down and specialize and make them as cheap as possible. So if American engineers go, listen, design a drone that does one thing perfectly and cheaply, they can do it. But if you let the generals get their grubby little fingers into it, they're going to turn it into a boondoggle.
And third, we're going to train as we expect to fight. Senior officers, well, I'll grab this. So this is the memo. Senior officers must overcome bureaucratic risk aversion in budgeting, weaponeering, and training. So here's the memo we're signing today, delivered via drones. Here on
Boom. Again, listen, I'm like, as I always say, I'll support any president that does any executive branch that does good governance. That's what I want. I want America that wins. And when they do, I'm here cheering for you guys. I'm cheering for this whole thing, right? And not just because I think he's making the right policy decisions. You literally just heard him make the exact same point that I just made, which is that you can't let these bureaucratic officers who the problem is in the military, it is becoming a general officer is so competitive that if you have one blemish on your record, you aren't going to make it, aren't going to be promoted. And what does that make, though? That means that the generals that took a big chance, right? Sometimes you take a big chance and it pays off and someone makes a movie about you. But sometimes you take a big chance and it really goes tits up and it's a disaster, right? And the problem is that when you are that officer, when you take those big risks, if you spend a career taking big risks, taking assignments, doing missions that are hard, difficult, push the boundaries of what's possible, that's probably who you want leading your military, but their record is going to be spotty. They're going to look like an officer who's not competent, not realizing that every time they took an assignment, it was something where they were operating at the edge of the possible. Instead, the general officer who looks the best on paper is going to have never made a mistake. But that means that they always played small. They always played inside the realm of the possible. They always followed all the instructions. They never once went outside of their chain of command. They never once pushed their unit beyond what it was capable of, right? They never discovered new ways that could be that fighting could happen. And so that is the kind of general who ends up in charge of this kind of acquisition programs where they say, listen, I just don't want to get in trouble, right? I don't want to be blamed when somebody goes, well, why can't your drone do reconnaissance, right? You don't want to have a president who goes, well, why can't this drone be a radio that flies, right? So they say, well, let's just make it everything. Just make it do everything. That way, that way, no matter what the need is, I'll kind of be able to say I met it. Even if, again, it's like a Swiss Army knife where you have a terrible blade, a terrible corkscrew, a terrible screwdriver, a terrible nail file. And again, that's not what normal human beings do. We just have a good corkscrew, an excellent chef's knife, a purpose-built nail file, and a set of strong ergonomic screwdrivers. So again, he's at least able to say the right things, which is frankly a great start. It's better than saying, listen, our generals are perfect. They're great. They're competent. I love them. They've never done anything wrong. More generals need to hear that they need to really swing for the fences. And I think there's a lot of officers that do. The problem is, again, the juice is never worth the squeeze. Nobody goes and gives you a high five, right? That you were a visionary for a program that shows up 5 years later after you've retired. But if you screw up a program, you find out that day and your career is cooked. So it's a little bit like if you lose, you get fired forever. And if you win, you get a Jolly Rancher. You're just like, dude, the incentives are to never play to win, right?
In the front lawn of the Pentagon, with some of our great warfighters flying them. This is the future. We're in the fight. We're in the fight to win it.
Oh, want to point out, look at this. I think that looks like a fiber optic spool, right? Fiber optic spool looks like a backup radio antenna. Damn it, the radio antennas. And a huge flipping battery.
I'm never going to back down.
But here's what I think is cool, right? They turn the camera around and they reveal the camera was a drone all along. So this is, why do I have praise for the Secretary of Defense for this? Well, one of the things we talked about when he came on board, I was like, listen, there's two paths that he can go. And he can understand, he can have the self-awareness to say, listen, I don't run a huge organization, but what I am the best in the world at is being the public face. I can get in front of a camera with and sell like that. And this is the appeal, right? This is just a memo. This is just but instead, he said, listen, let's turn it into a viral moment. And we're going to have this sort of a little bit of a staged manage, a little bit of a stunt, right? It's a little bit goofy, but it's authentic. And I think this is somebody who is playing into his best strengths, right? And the reality is this operational planning side of the house is not what he's good at. And so a good organizational leader is going to sit there and have the self-awareness to go, listen, I need to do what I'm really good at, right? And that is going to be selling things to both the US public, this is awesome. Literally, I had friends send me this video. Can you name a time in the Biden administration or any previous administration where a DOD memo release, you got text from your friends about it, right? Like, even if it's cringe, in fact, because it's a little cringe, I think it actually helps sell it. It says that this is a regular guy, right? They're not stage managed to hell. It's, again, like it is relatable, and it sends a message both to the US that, listen, this is what your military is doing. This is what your tax dollars are doing. We're trying to bring ourselves into the fight of the future. It also sends a message to America's enemies to say, listen, this is how seriously we're taking the drone program. And this is how seriously we're doing this. Now, there's some reasons to not like tip your hat, so to speak, but if you're already going to release the memo, you might as well get the credit with the public for doing the right thing. So again, I think this is an example of the Secretary of Defense using his skill set, right? And saying, listen, this is what I'm great at, and I'm going to do what I'm great at. I'm going to make sure the public gets the confidence. Our allies get the confidence. The U.S. military is not going to sit behind. We're not a dinosaur. And we are going to do so in a way that's going to build fanfare and build interest, right? Because of this, are there more companies that are going to compete for these drone contracts? I think so, right? And I hope so. So again, credit where credit's due. I think this is the Secretary of Defense doing his job like at his best, doing the right things, making good policy, but also getting the credit for doing good policy. And signaling to our allies and to our enemies that, listen, we're really doing this. It's not a memo. It's not some Pentagon document. It's going to get filed away, right? This is how serious we are about this. And I think it's brilliant, right? Now, before we talk about the fact that things are actually also, the president seems to be more open than ever to actually sending aid to Ukraine. This was literally also potentially going to be the leading story. But again, weird day. We had two stories that could effectively lead the video. But before I talk about that, I want to mention two things. The first is, of course, you guys know, again, Combat Vet News. This is my version of Patreon. This is the way to support me and the channel and the team. You guys know that I cover some controversial issues. I just made that video about the Epstein list, and you can predict the monetization on that. But the reason I can cover those topics and I can take these high risk topics, even though advertisers and sponsors aren't going to touch me, even though they're radioactive, is because you guys have my back. So if you want access to uncensored combat videos, including one sent from the front line, in fact, I just got a video from one of my contacts at the front line, 4 minutes of drone footage. This is the same contact who sent me that video of the drone capacity that we've never seen before. So if you want access to all of that, that's something that any membership tier gets you. Plus, of course, supporting me. But more importantly, perhaps, is that if you want to support the Ukrainians, who are right now the only military in the West capable of resisting a drone-equipped Russian armed forces, boy, they need your help. Fiber optic drones, Russian fiber optics are really hard to counter, and the Ukrainians have a layered defense system, but they need more resources. One, of course, is countering Russian drones, particularly getting their own long-range fiber optic drones. We're raising money for those so they can find where these Russian drone teams are launching. We're also getting them quad bikes because, as we saw in yesterday's video, the soldiers that pickup trucks are just they're too big of targets. They have to stay on the roads. Russian fiber optic drones piece them apart. And so now the Ukrainian soldiers either have to walk 6+ miles to positions with a backpack full of ammo and water to resupply, or they can use these quad bikes, these ATVs that can zip around the battlefield, taking what would be up to 2 hours exposed to Russian FPV drones and turn it into a 20-minute jaunt. It's a no-brainer. So we're trying to get these guys for them, and of course, lots and lots of camouflage nets to protect their MSR. So if you want to help these guys out, you want to click on the donation link in the description. Huge thank you to everybody that's shown up, right? I mean, this is really an international effort. Look, donor from Mark from Israel, John dropping $31, as I've said, $30 from Jan, Daniel, light shines in the darkness, darkness will come light, from the Gospel of John from Romania. Really seeing everybody step up. Here's Thomas saying, I didn't order pizza. I had spaghetti and canned tuna and said, save $20. Here's the $20 for you guys. Really awesome to see you guys step up for these units, and they are unbelievably appreciative. So thanks to you guys again. Check the links in the description. Okay, this is wild. Trump is now open to Ukraine aid if peace talks progress. Now, this is sort of what bothers me a little bit, is that Trump has told senior advisors he's open to approving additional security and economic aid for Ukraine. Sources familiar with the discussion say, provided there are assurances Kiev will engage seriously in peace negotiations with Russia. And this is sort of annoying because Kiev has been engaging seriously with these peace negotiations. Remember, Kiev has said yes to almost every truce and ceasefire the U.S. proposed. Kiev said yes to the minerals deal, something that they believed was actually sort of a down payment on future aid, which has never materialized. And so this is a positive step potentially. But again, remember that if Trump wants to see actual peace progress, this has been really elusive because Russia has no-showed these deals. In fact, since starting his negotiations, Russia has actually adopted more extreme positions than he had at the start of the war, right? Initially, the Russian position were things like the annexing additional Ukrainian oblasts, Ukraine abandoning NATO ambitions. But now Russian position involves actually NATO forces pulling back from countries they have sworn to protect, even potentially a rollback of countries being forced to leave NATO. The Russian demands involve actually the Western forces no longer training Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukraine actually standing down its military. So absolutely, Trump's efforts to coerce Russia into negotiations appear to be backfiring as Russia positions get more extreme, not less. And the problem is that if Trump says, listen, there has to be real peace progress as a contingent for U.S. aid to Ukraine, well, then for Putin, he says, listen, as long as I avoid the peace process, my opponent, Ukraine, will get weaker every week. And every week I stall and avoid the process is a week that, again, I'm going to have a greater advantage over Ukraine. So this has the potential to be a massive strategic miscalculation, just like Trump's previous strategic miscalculations, ordering indefinite pauses on billions of weapon and ammunition aids, pausing for no reason Ukrainian aid, Ukrainian intelligence sharing, just sort of randomly pulling the rug out on the Ukrainians, forcing them to sign over a minerals deal and then providing them no meaningful aid in exchange. All of these things are things that have made Ukraine much, much weaker. Russia, in turn, has experienced no coercion. In fact, even though Trump tariffed every other country on planet Earth, he refused to tariff Russia. Instead, actually dropping tariffs against a Russian nuclear energy giant, a nuclear energy company, permitting them to open a nuclear power plant in Hungary. So all of this stuff is, again, I'm skeptical when I hear it because Trump himself seems to have an almost comical bias towards Russia. Now, again, different sources are saying different things. In fact, a different source talking to Reuters said that the president will authorize sending weapons to Kiev under the Presidential Drawdown Authority, but it's for, again, a relatively small $300 million. For context, that's, a third of $1 billion. And over the course of the war, we provided about $175 billion in aid. So, that represents about what, 1/1000th of the total aid amount that we've sent so far. But still, anything is helpful because, again, a lot of this aid is stuff that the Ukrainians now have a much better sense of what exactly they need. So their needs are more targeted. They say, listen, there's some things that we can't make in-house that we need from you guys. Patriot missile batteries, artillery shells, GMLRS systems. They're like, if you can get us those key things, we don't need a lot. We just need the right stuff at the right time. So I actually think this has potential to be more helpful. Again, he's alluded to sending more weapons to Ukraine. But remember, guys, the president talks about doing a lot of things. His actions oftentimes don't align with them at all. You might recall that the U.S. president during election season said not only would he end the war in one day, which hasn't come to fruition at all, but also that he would release all the Epstein files, which also, again, in terms of actions, he's taken no substantive actions towards that. And in fact, has said that the Epstein files are things that suddenly no one should be interested in, which is weird for someone who was photographed numerous times with Epstein and, of course, rode on his private jet dozens of times and visited him in his apartment and were at times considered, they were considered best friends in the early 2000s. But don't worry, there's nothing suspicious about any of that. Anyway, guys, thank you so much to the Colonel tier members like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gow, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul J.W.'s, Jeff Davies, Mike 54, Citrine Margaret, and the GMAT Club, as well as all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I'll see you over there on Tuesday for this latest video drop. Cheers. See ya.